When I woke it was daylight again. A fire burnt on the hearth in the middle of the hall, and someone had spread a wolfskin rug over me. I had not moved from sunset to sunrise, and I was refreshed and broad awake at once, wondering at first where I was, and who had laughed and woke me. There was a youth sitting on a table's edge by the wall over against where I lay, and a big broad-shouldered man leant on it with folded arms beside him, and at first I stared at them till my thoughts came back, and they laughed at me again, and then I knew Godwine and Ralph the Thane, who had but just come up from their ship to find me. "On my word," said Godwine, "here is a man who could teach one how to sleep. We have sat here and talked about you for 10 minutes or more." "Redwald sleeps as though he had lost time to make up," said Ralph. "Welcome back to us, anyway." "I welcome you are," said Godwine warmly, "but how did you come here?" I got up and took their hands, rejoicing to see them. It was good to be among friends again after the long watching and many dangers. Then came the steward followed by his men with a mighty breakfast, and as he set the tables on the high place, Godwine's men trooped in. They had had to wait for the morning tide into the haven, and the ship was just berthed. "Food first," Ralph advised. "Then shall Redwald tell us all he knows." So by and by we sat in the morning sunlight in the courtyard, and I told them all that had happened from beginning to end. They knew no more than that Ethelred was dead, and that Nut was besieging London. "We tried to chase those Danes because they had got our man's ship," said Godwine. "When we got near enough, for they came downwind and passed us before long, we found that Berkrick was contented enough, running up his own flag, and the Danes did not stay to fight. So we came home, only losing our tide by the delay." "What would you have done had you known that the Queen was on board, and a prisoner?" I asked. "Why, nothing more than we have done," Godwine said. "My father hates Emma the cat as bitterly as he does Streeln the fox, which is saying a good deal. The cat's claws are clipped now, maybe." Well, I knew this, and said nothing. One could expect no more from Earl Wulfnoth's son. Nor do I think that any loved Emma the Queen much. One may know how a person is thought of by the way in which folk name them often enough, and though our king would have had his young wife called by her English name, Elfgiva, none ever did so. Her Norman, foreign name was all we used. If she had been loved, we should have rejoiced to name her in our own way. Then Godwine said, "You have had an ill time with Emma, as I think, if she is all that my father says." "Nay, Godwine," said Ralph, "Redwald will not bear much of this. He is the Queen's faithful servant, and will have naught against her, and he is right." "So he is, and I am wrong," said the lad at once. "Forgive me, friend, I did not think." Then I laughed, and turned it off. Godwine was only too right, but I could not say so. Now, however, I may say that the memory of Emma the Queen's ways is to me as a nightmare. "I would that I could meet with this Egil," Godwine said as I gave him sword foe's bane to handle, and then he forgot all else in the beauty of the weapon. "What have you done with the brave maiden?" Ralph asked me now. "She is in the nunnery here," I said. "She is friendless, having no folk of her own nearer than Peterborough." "That is far off," said Ralph, and began to think, twisting his beard as was his wont when pondering somewhat weighty. Now, before he had made up his mind to say any more, Godwine was ready to hear about the winning back of the sword, and of the fights in Ulfketel's land, and then a man came from the ships with some business, and he went away with him. And by that time Ralph had somewhat to say. "Penhust is a lonesome place, and it will be worse for my wife when Sexburga is gone," he said musingly. "Why, where is your daughter going?" I asked him. He looked at me sidewise for a moment, and I thought that his face fell a little. Then he said, Going to be wedded shortly. That is well, I said. To whom? Then the Thane turned fairly round on me with wide eyes, and a blank fear fell on me that he meant that I was to wed her. Yet surely the lady had told him that I was betrothed. Ho, he said, did you not know that? Methought everyone did. That was worse, and I knew not what he looked for from me. I have been away, I have heard not, I answered lamely enough. Oh, aye, so you have, he said. Truly, I forgot that. We quiet people fancy that all the world knows our affairs. And it was in my mind that you had a tenderness that way yourself. I knew not how you would take it. Then we both laughed, but it was not a hearty laughter, for each feared the other a little, as it seemed. I am glad for Sexburga, if she is happy, said I. Why, now, that is well, said Ralph. I had thought that I must break this matter gently to you. Maybe you would have had to do so had I bided at Penhust much longer, said I truly enough. All the same, Redwald, I wish it were you, on my faith, said the Thane, growing red in his earnestness. Thanks therefore, said I, it is good to hear you say so, but I am a landless warrior in bad luck, and so it is better as it is. Who is the man of Sexburga's choice? Eldred of Dollington, said he. A good youth enough, and with lands enough. He has never seen a fight, though, and then he turned on me suddenly, putting his hand on mine. I could have sworn, lad, that you were fond of the girl. Tell me if it is so, and Eldred shall go down the wind like a straight hawk, for all I care. I shook my head, but it came over me for a moment that I wished I might recall the wandering fancies of the winter days in Penhust, but that passed, and I was lonely in heart. Nay, Thane, that is not so. My sword here is all that I love next to my king and Olaf my cousin and Ralph the Thane. I have no love for any maiden, nor could Sexburga think twice of me. If you had bided a little longer. Well, then, no hearts are broken, or so much as awry, and that is well. So, as I was saying, Penhust will be lonely directly, and already I love this maiden with the outland name for saving you. How would she take it if we gave her shelter with us? I am going back home in a day or two, and you must come with me. The good Thane spoke fast, being easier in his mind, as it seemed, on one point, and not willing to make any show of generosity on the other. That is a kind thought of yours, I said, being very glad, and not less so that I could not help rejoicing that I should see more of Uldra. I wonder what my wife would say, he said thoughtfully. If I know aught of her kindness, and I think that I have proved it well, answered I, she will be glad to help this orphan maiden. Let us go and see her, and ask her to come, therefore, said Ralph, rising up. I want to thank her, moreover, for saving you. I was nowise loath, and so we went along under the trees towards the nunnery. And as we went Ralph talked of Eldred, the Thane of Dollington, and the wedding that was to come. And all the while I believed that he was troubling about two things that were mixed in his mind: fear that I was set aside by Sexburga, and a wish that I had been the bridegroom. Then we knocked on the great door, and he was silent until a sister looked through the little barred square wicket in the midst of it. We would speak with the Lady Uldra, I said. I am the Thane who brought her ashore. The sister said not, but shut the wicket door, and left us. We heard her steps retreating across the little courtyard, and she shut a door after her somewhere else. Then all was quiet. What does that mean? Ralph said. That we have to wait, said I, that is all. It is the way in which they treat folk at these places. They would do the same if the Queen came. She has gone to her superior. What would Emma say? Chuckled Ralph, looking slyly at me. One cannot say much to an iron-barred oak door. But there are thanes and such like left outside, he said, laughing more yet. Now Godwine is not here, I dare say that you have felt, more than once, the Queen's tongue for naught. I will deny it, said I, to anyone but Elfric the Abbot, whereat he laughed till the tears came into his eyes. He had known our Queen in the old days before Streon's treachery. I was glad that the wicket flew open again. Ralph stayed his laughter in a moment, and became very grave. What would she say now? He whispered. Enough, I said, for the sister, having seen that we waited, unbarred the gate and let us in. Then she pointed to a door on our right, and went away. I took Ralph's arm and led him to this door, for he was going to follow the sister, and we opened it. It led into a small high-roofed chamber, that had a great crucifix painted in bright colors on the east wall, and pictured legends on the rest, between high narrow windows. But there stood Uldra, no longer in convent dress, but in some robe of dark blue and crimson that became her well, so that at first I hardly knew her, for now for the first time I saw her bright brown hair that the novice's hood had hidden from me. I could not say that Uldra was fair as Sexburga to look on, but, as ever, I thought that her face was the sweetest that I had seen in all my life. I was a little abashed before this grave and stately maiden, who was the same, and yet not the same, as she who had been through so much danger and trial with me, and I could not find a word to say at first. Nor could she, as it seemed, and so we looked at one another until she smiled. It was only for a moment, however, for when her face lighted up thus, Ralph found his voice and spoke. I have come to thank you, lady, for saving my comrade's life yesterday, he said, taking her hand and kissing it. I had lost a good friend but for you, he tells me. But for the Thane, your friend, I know not what would have become of us, she answered. The thanks are from me to him, rather. Yet I think that I owe you somewhat, Ralph said, and now I am minded to try to show that I would thank you indeed, and not in word only. He paused, and Uldra looked at me as if asking if I could throw any light on this stranger's meaning. Ralph, the Thane of Penhost, is he who gave me shelter and care when I was hurt in a fight and a flood last winter, I said. He has indeed been a good friend to me. Not I, said Ralph, you fought for me. It was my wife and Sexburga, my daughter, who tended you. Now at that name, which she already knew, the maiden looked quickly away from me, and a little flush began to creep up into her face, with pleasure as it would seem. I have heard of your daughter Sexburga already, she said to Ralph with a little smile. Why, that is well, he said. Now, after her wedding my wife will be sorely lost for want of a companion, and I would ask you to come home to Penhost with us, and bide there until you may seek your friends again or as long as you wish. And glad shall we be of your help at the wedding feast. So he spoke cheerfully, trying to make all the honor come from her, as kindness to himself and his wife. But though the tears came into Uldra's eyes at the good Thane's plain meaning, she was silent yet, save that she said, I know not how to thank you for your goodwill to me. Nay, he said, but my wife will blame me if you come not. Here, she will say, is the companion whom I needed, and a friend of our Redwald's, moreover, and you have not brought her. I pray you, come with us. Do you ask her, Redwald, I am rough, and you are courtly? Then I said, Lady, this is all that Elfric would wish for you. I cannot tell you of the great kindness that is waiting for you in the Thane's home. And for answer she turned away and began to weep, and Ralph could bear that not at all, and he went to her and put his arm round her, as he would have done to Sexburga, and tried to reassure her. Why, he said, here is not to weep about, maiden. Maybe we are homely people, but I think that you may learn to be happier in freedom with us than here. Nay, but weep not so bitterly, you shall be as our daughter to us if you will, for Redwald's life's sake. Aye, you shall have Sexburga's own chamber and all that. But still Uldra wept, and I was unhappy to see her do so. This could not be all for sudden relief from doubt as I had thought at first. Then she took herself gently from the Thane's arm, and dried her eyes, and clasped her hands tightly before her, and said, I cannot say how I thank you, but I must bide here. This is a cold place, said the Thane. It is no home for you. I think it will be so in the end, she said very sadly. And I tried hard to think of somewhat to say that might persuade her, but there was that meaning in her voice that seemed to stay whatever came to me. I thought that she had made up her mind to take the veil, and there are few things that will turn a maiden from that when once she has chosen it. Then said Ralph, Maybe I ask you too suddenly, lady. Let us leave it till tomorrow, and I pray you think with all kindness of the matter, for I shall be sorely grieved if you will not come. And I said the same as well as I could, but though she promised to give her answer in the morning, it was plain to me that it would be even as she said now. Then we took our leave of her, and found our way out of the place, somewhat downhearted. The door was bolted after us, though I do not know who did it, or whence the portress watched our going. And it was dismal to hear the great bars jarring in their sockets. Poor maid, said Ralph. Why does she choose such a prison? Those dismal nuns have talked her into it, said I angrily. Maybe. It is a way they have, the Thane said. Come in here, said the rat in the trap to the rat outside, one is safe from the cat behind these bars. So we walked on for a little, and then he said, How did she hear of Sexburga? I thought you had had no speech with her on the journey. Nor had I answered. I thought she was another silent nun. But I thought she was like Sexburga, and so I called her sister Sexburga to myself, giving her a name in my thoughts. Then in the boat it slipped out unawares when I had to speak to her, and she asked to be told why I called her so. As much like Sexburga as you are like Godwine, which is not at all, said Ralph laughing. Was she pleased? Why, I think not, I answered. How much more about Sexburga did you tell her? He asked. Nothing, there was no need. Then Ralph began to chuckle to himself, and I could not tell why. But presently he said, Did you give the sisters names likewise? Yes, I did. I do not think I should have cared to say what they were, I answered, laughing also. He said no more about this, and we came to the hall, and then went to find Godwine at the ships. But I could not but feel disappointed that Uldra would not come with us. And that was not all for her own sake, as I found when I came to turn over my thoughts a little. I would fain see more of the maiden who had borne peril so well, and had stood so bravely at my side. Now when Godwine heard how our errand had failed, he laughed at Ralph's downcast looks and said, scanning my weather-beaten and forest-worn garments, Maidens love to see warriors go in bright array. She is tired of those old weeds of Redwald's. We must fit him out afresh in the morning, and then she will listen maybe. He was so pleased with this boyish wisdom of his own, being fully persuaded that he was right, that he and I must ride together to Chichester with morning light, and find new gear for me. We roll in riches since you fell into the pit, he said, when I would pay for what I had with my last piece of gold. And you must keep that one, there are more due to you yet as I think. Nor would he be denied in this, and it is not a warrior's part to take an earl's gifts grudgingly. And when I fairly shone in bright array from head to foot, he must needs add a wonderful round brooch, silver and gold wrought, with crimson garnets at the ends and in the spaces of the arms of a cross of inlaid pearl and enamel, such as one seldom sees. "It is a Kentish brooch," he said, "so shall men know that you are a friend of the Earls of Kent and Sussex." That was an earl's giving indeed, but Godwine is ever open-handed, and I am not alone in learning how he will give. "Now we must go back, and you shall seek this damsel again since old Ralph is so set thereon. As for you, it is likely that you have had trouble enough with her already, and will care little if she will not come," he said, and looked me over from head to foot as we stood outside the chapman's house in the wide place where the four roads cross in Chichester town. "My faith," he added, "I believe that even Emma the cat would mind what you told her now." "Lord Earl," said I, "you will make me vain." "Earl, forsooth," he cried, "the clothes have made you mighty courtly all at once. Godwine and Redwald are going back to Bosham, and the Earl bides at Chichester Cross, mind you that." And he swung himself on his horse laughing, and we rode away, while the people shouted, for they had gathered in twos and threes to look on him. Now when we came back to the great house, there was Ralph sitting on the bench where we had sat yesterday, and he looked as if he had had good news. "Now, Thane," said Godwine, "here is a new messenger to your sorrowful damsel." Ralph stared at me and laughed, and when I got off my horse Godwine would have us go at once. So Ralph took my arm and we went, while the young Earl joked us till we were out of hearing. "Now," said the Thane, "we will not spoil the Earl's jest, but must even let him think that all has been his doing thus. Why, he will see us start for Penhost, and if Aldra is not there—" "Aye, but she will be." "She is coming gladly," Ralph said. "How is this?" I asked. "Just that I have been to see the maiden while you were gone, and I spoke to her as to a daughter, and so she is coming." "You would not wait for me, then?" I said, being glad that he had managed without me, as things had turned out. "Methought I could do better alone." "The girl would say more to me than if you were there, perhaps. Moreover, I had a notion why she would not come, and I wanted to ask her if I was right." And I was. "I thought of that," said I. "She was in the same plight as myself until Godwine decked me out thus. Women think more of their attire than we." The Thane chuckled in his quiet way. "Why, perhaps that had somewhat to do with it, but I did not ask her, I forgot. But I did tell the old lady superior to do so, and gave her withal to care for the maiden." Then I said, "It is well that you persuaded her, maybe I should have been in the way. I should have lost my tongue again, I think." "Well, yes," said Ralph, still laughing to himself, "it was you who were in the way. However, as you say, all is well, and she rides with us tomorrow. We will go and find a mule or a good forest pony for her, and so tell Godwine that the clothes have done it." Now I never thought that there was anything more behind the Thane's words, for of all things that had made my soul weary in these last weeks the complaints of Emma the Queen about her dress had been the worst. So this seemed to me to be quite enough to explain Aldra's first refusal, and though I believed that Ralph had been on the point of telling me more, he forbore, and let this suffice. Ralph knew where to look for a beast, and we soon had a good bay pony, that was quiet enough and strong, sent to Godwine's stables. And then Ralph told the Earl what he had done. "Then I was right," said Godwine gleefully. "I will warrant that you two wise heads would never have thought thereof." "Are you coming with us?" I asked him, for I did not care to have to find answers to many questions about our speech with Aldra, as things were. "I am coming by sea presently with 2 ships," he said. "I shall wait till Berkrick comes back, and so maybe shall have news of your queen to tell you. He should not be long. Ralph goes back for the early hay time, he says, but I believe that he is tired of the sea." "I am no sailor, lord," the thane said. "As any of my crew will tell you," Godwine said merrily. "Never, Redwald, was any man so undone as Ralph when there is a little sea on. A common forest deer thief could tie him up." "I should have thanked one for slaying me at times," said Ralph grimly. "I prefer solid ground to shifty deck planks." So whether it was love of home or loathing of sea that took him back to Penhost, Ralph and I left Godwine on the next morning, and at the nunnery door waited Uldra, looking bright and cheerful and greeting us gladly as we came. And it seemed to me that her troubles had passed from her, and that she was indeed glad to be leaving the walls of the place that was so prison-like. Now that was a fair and pleasant ride over the downs and among the forest paths through Sussex, and I look back on it as the brightest time that I had had in all the long years of trouble. The joy of going back to my old home at Bears had been clouded with the knowledge of loss, and with the sight of the trail of war. But here were none of these things. We rode with 20 housecarls of Ralph's behind us, and it was a new thing to me that I should see the wayside folk run out into the trackway to see us pass, that the farm thralls in the fields should but rise up, straightening stiffened backs and laughing, and stay their work for a moment to watch us, that no man who met us should ask with anxious face, "What news of the Danes?" New it was, and most pleasant to Uldra also, for she had come through all the harried land, where the click of steel or the glint of armor had bidden the poor folk fly in terror, so that one rode through silent and deserted villages, and past farms where naught but the dogs told of life about the place. And that was what I had seen over all England since Sweyn of Denmark landed, so long ago. Men will hardly believe it now. Ralph could hardly believe us as we told him. Yet today, were I to ride into an East Saxon village shouting the Danes, there are men who would cast down tools and all else that they were busied with, and clutch at the weapons that rust on the wall before thought could come to them. For the terror of these years cannot pass from England yet while any man is alive who knew it. Now there was another pleasure for me, and that was to watch Uldra growing brighter and happier day by day. It was wonderful to me to see this, and with me she was ever frank and open, never wearying of speaking of our former journey and its troubles, for we could smile at them now. And Ralph grew very fond of her in those few days, as one might see. Nor do I know how anyone could help doing so. Even the rough housecarls would watch for a chance of doing some little service for her. And yet, as I have said, Uldra was not the fairest maiden that I had seen. Men are apt to think that the fairest must ever be the best, and a man learns that it is not so only by degrees, maybe. And when I looked on Uldra's face it began to seem to me the best that could be, and ever to me it would seem that I knew it well. For some look of hers that should be new to me was not new. I had expected it in some way, and should have wondered not to see it cross her face. And so in gesture and in word also. So that she seemed already well known to me, and why this was I could not say, and at times it troubled me as puzzling things will. But, all the same, I loved to find myself so puzzled. Thus, by the time we came over the great spur of the downs that ends in Beachy Head, and looked over all Pevensey level to the Penhost woods and hills beyond, I and Uldra were very good friends, and Ralph was pleased that it should be so, and rode between us in high content. It was midday when we passed the last hill of the downs where the mighty giant lies like a shadow on the grass by Wilmington. Then we saw the grey castle where Wulfnoth bided, away to our right, and then along the steep ridge inland and down to Boreham, where I must tell the maiden of the great sea wave, and how Olaf saved me. And so we came to Penhost in its valley among the trees, and the ride was over. Now there is no need to say what welcome was at that house, whether for its lord, or for the warrior who had been nursed back to life there, or for the new-come homeless maiden. Ralph was not wrong when he told her that she should be as a daughter in the house. Some of the men had ridden on, so that the homecoming feast should be spread for us, and there was the lady at the courtyard gates, and with her Sexburga, and a tall, handsome young thane, whom I knew for Eldred of Dollington, and there was Father Anselm, and Spray the smith, and many more whose faces I was glad to see again. And among all those faces were not but welcoming looks save from one only. I did not note this, being taken up with watching how they greeted Uldra, for that seemed to me to be the only thing that I cared about. If I had any thought of Sexburga now, it was as if she had been my sister, and I hoped that she would be pleased with the maiden who was thus brought to her unlooked for. I need have troubled not about that, however, for she and her mother were alike in many things, and if I was sure of the one, so might I have been of the other in all that had to do with kindness. But if I had looked beyond Sexburga to where her young thane stood, I should have met with a black scowl enough, though I could not have told why this should be his greeting for me. I had but seen him once before, and that was at Earl Wulfnutha's feast to Olaf when we first came. That was an evening to be remembered as most pleasant when, after the feast, we sat and spoke of all that had happened since I left Penhust. I told them all the tale of warfare, and of Olaf's deeds, and of the winning back of my sword, and how that helped our meeting with Egil. And when Spray the smith, who sat listening, with the other men in the hall below the high place, heard of that escape from the Danes, he said, without ceremony, "Master, well I knew that you would never be cast into prison." "That was a saying of yours, Spray," said I, "may the luck last." Then Uldra would tell the story of our journey in her way, and my name came pretty often into her tale. So, looking about the hall while she spoke, my eyes lit on Eldred, and it seemed that he was ill at ease, and displeased with somewhat. I thought that he would rather be sitting nearer Sexburga, maybe, and troubled not about him, though I did think that he showed his ill temper over plainly in his face. Now, in all this story-telling there was one thing about which I said nothing, and that was my search for Hertha. It seemed to me that there was no need for doing so, and moreover, I would tell the lady thereof in private at some time. And I was glad that Sexburga asked me not about it. I do not think that she had forgotten it, but she had her own reasons for saying not of the matter, which were foolish enough when I found them out. The lady, her mother, waited for me to say what I would in my own way when I thought right.